It's been 6 months since we announced the Gene Roddenberry Archive, and a lot has happened.
Our team is growing, we're building more assets, and we're very excited to show the progress that we've made.
Something very exciting happened shortly after we announced the Roddenberry Archive. I was invited to speak at the Apple keynote, and so we showed the motion picture one-to-one in Universe Enterprise in the Apple keynote. It was just an incredible experience.
In the television industry, if you want to sell a television series, what you generally do is you produce a sample episode. It's called a pilot. For Star Trek, that sample episode was called The Cage. The episode was written by Gene Roddenberry and directed by Robert Butler.
Who knew in 1964, who knew that it would be this accessible to people? How you would respond to it and follow it. Unexpected and amazing. I was a young director, a green director. The phone rings and you wind up in an office. Gene and myself talking about Star Trek. You have to start at ground zero. Here are these people and they're waiting to be told what to do. It takes work and specificity.
Robert Butler was just so personable and so caring. What makes somebody a great director is how they communicate.
I do an immense amount of preparation, so when I walk in, the way to do it is to answer every problem, every question.
He knows when he has it right, whether you have to do it once or twice, maybe 3 times at the most.
I didn't have the experience in science fiction. Gene was righter than I was because his purity, if you will, his belief got into those words, got into those characters.
Back in 1964, Gene Roddenberry created a universe that none of us had seen before.
He was the man with the dream. Something was burning in that guy.
Gene Roddenberry never left the set. Here is the executive producer the whole time, trying to make sure that every line is perfect. It was important to him.
It's been very illuminating researching the sets as they were back then. A little bit stripped down, less color. Color TV hadn't really caught on at that time. But when you study the sets, you realize that they were lighting the sets with these gold and purple hues, that little splash of colored lighting in there that really makes it feel kind of mid-century science fiction. Even though the walls were painted gray, they used those subtle colored lightings to give it an otherworldly feel to it.
I was very nervous bringing Bob Butler in, showing him what we've been doing. Having his thumbs up, it gave me goosebumps.
I was aware of the size that this show has become. I saw the size there. I saw the size here. Testimony to the quality.
It's been really rewarding to see the feedback from those that actually worked on the show coming in and seeing the world of Star Trek as they remember it brought back to life. That's where the magic of the work that we've done really kicks in. We're at the point where we're looking to rebuild and reconstitute these uniforms digitally, physically, scanning them, putting a performer.
Stepping into a starship, whether virtual or physically recreated, to those of us who grew up with Gene Roddenberry's creation, to come back there is like coming home.
To share that experience with like-minded people is a goal of ours. We want everyone to share that joy.
When you're looking at the timeline of the Star Trek story, and you're looking, let's say, at one of the most famous pieces of that world, which is the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, you can play that forwards and backwards in time in the archive, and you can see, almost like a time lapse, how pieces of the bridge and the sets were changed, and we can document those elements. Seeing the inside of that ship change over time is like a time capsule of sorts.
The Starship Enterprise is very possibly Gene Roddenberry's single most famous creation. And one of the early projects of the Roddenberry Archive is to document these remarkable ships.
We have the ability to tell the story of that ship. There's other ships that were created in the future that are inspired by the original Enterprise. You will see the ship change over time.
These digital assets will allow you to have an accurate sense of this amazing world created by Gene Roddenberry.
I recreated the original Enterprise from The Cage. A lot of the details that you'd see in the original series just aren't on that model. A lot of what I was doing was actually subtracting, trying to get it back to that original state from the first pilot.
Seeing the Enterprise, it instantly struck you as real, and everything about it made sense, and these are the rules of how starships work. It was all because of the stuff that Matt Jeffries had worked out.
Matt was tasked with the job of translating Gene's notes into a physical filming model. And because he had a background as a real aviator, he understood what made airplanes fly. He called it aircraft logic.
It's iconic, it's simple, and we actually haven't really got something better. It's because the design was so perfect that you're like, Why mess with it?
I've been working on the full one-to-one scale refit Enterprise from the motion picture with a complete full interior. To do that, we've partnered with Laura Johnson, who wrote Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise.
We're trying very hard to return to what we call first principles. What was it actually like? What did they build? How do we know that? How can we reverse engineer it to figure out the actual dimensions, the actual shapes?
We're developing a series of deck plans, and I'm going through deck by deck. This is not about me as an artist. I want people, when they look at this model when it's done, I want them to go, Harold Michelson was a great production designer. Andy Probert was a genius the way he designed this. I'm in a role of preservation. I need to make sure that if there's any artistry that comes through in this, it's not mine. It has to be theirs.
We want to make sure that if you go beyond what was filmed, it looks right, it works. Where there was plywood and where there's maybe a camera, we fill that in. That's the in-universe version of the Star Trek Enterprise.
There are visual elements and visual styles and visual cues all throughout the motion picture that we can take apart and reassemble in a way so it looks like it's a new section of the ship, but there's a familiarity to it. This is what the people who initially built this thing, who initially drew this thing and painted this thing and designed this thing, this is what they intended, to the best of our knowledge.
When we talk about the life-size Enterprise, people can walk through it. They can press a button, maybe even watch events play out. It's meant to be an accurate record of the story of Star Trek. And yet, there's so much that came before that isn't documented, that might get lost to history. We need to do the work to preserve that as well. There's really an entire universe that we're trying to represent in the Roddenberry Archive.
The Roddenberry Archive is a revolutionary concept. It's Gene Roddenberry's vision of hope and optimism, and it demands to be saved for generations. I don't think there's anything more important than conveying that hope, that belief in the human spirit that Gene Roddenberry held dear. And that's why we're very proud to be part of the Roddenberry Archive.